Hello, and welcome to the Practice Marketing Podcast, highlighting successful strategies from North America's fastest growing clinics so you can learn from their wins and power your practice growth. I'm your host, Neil Trickett. I'm the CEO of Practice Promotions. And today's focus, we're going to talk about 5 simple steps to give your clinic a fresh start here in the new year. And we're chatting here with Travis Robbins. He's the founder of Next Level Physical Therapy Group and also physicaltherapybilling.com. He's got amazing insights, consults a lot of clinics. So we're excited to have you on here, Travis, with us.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
Excellent. So, Travis, you've run your own practice for quite a while now, right? About how many years?
20 years. This is our 20th year
Years.
in business.
Congratulations. That's a huge milestone in any business, right? 20 years. And you've had some great wins since then. I believe you're now, was it 4 locations at your practices?
Yeah, so we have 4 locations now. I'm opening up another one hopefully in a month if I can get construction around, and then probably another one towards the end of next year. And then we have MSAs. So those are managed services agreements that we have with other entities. So physicians where they own the practice, but we kind of run it for them. So that's been pretty interesting. But yeah, anything physical therapy I'm interested in working in. So I try a little bit of everything.
That's awesome. And then you also co-founded the Next Level Physical Therapy Group where you help consult other practice owners, correct?
Yeah, that's been a cool journey. So it really was just the start was a mastermind. It was me and other private practice owners that got together. And then we started to see some huge improvement in our practices. And we were like, wow, this is pretty good information we should share with other people. And that ranged anything from doing live events. So we do live events where we rent out houses in Florida and do like really interactive, like across the table from our clients, like working on their practices, pulling apart their books and systems like that. We do on-site coaching. So we'll go to practices. Arlen and I was another one of the founders in LPT. We went out to Iowa this summer, which was awesome when we go like boots on the ground with practice owners and do that. We do virtual coaching. So any kind of like help that we can give private practice owners in whatever capacity that they feel most comfortable, we do that. And then that kind of spun off into a billing company. So we was talking to Neil before we got on, and it's an industry that we would always find that our practice owners struggled with. We would pull apart their books and be like, hey, what's going on with your billing and collections? And it's not the most exciting thing. Like marketing is way more exciting than doing billing and collections, but it's a huge issue for a lot of practice owners. And just looking at some major metrics and stuff that we didn't get training on in school, similar to we didn't get training on marketing in school. So it's something that practice owners need. And until you kind of identify the issue that they have, it's hard. They don't even really see it. It's like, oh, I get paid sometimes. And it seems like, when I go to pull my payroll, there's enough money in there. And that's how I was. It's like, so must be doing good.
Must be good,
And
right? Yeah, yeah.
well, we want to take a little bit closer look at that because there's some money that you're leaving on the table, which can help you grow your business, which is what
Yeah.
this podcast is about, right?
Absolutely. And so we're coming up to that time of year where we all take a fresh look at, okay, we've got another year ahead of us. Where are we at? What do we want to do? What do we want to accomplish here? And so it's that reflection point, that time in our year when we're actually looking at business growth specifically, right? And so, as you've been working with practice owners for well over 5 years now from the consulting side and then the billing side of things. Um, from the clinic owners like I talk to, not just physical therapists, but all kinds of practice owners, but in general, they seem to be in a state of overwhelm, right? They've got all these different things that they have to be handling, right? And so, like for you, as you consult people, where do you get people to start when they're looking at this new year?
Yeah. The New Year is kind of my favorite time of year. I don't know what your favorite holiday is, Neil, but mine is New Year's Eve. There's something weird about that time of year. It's just like I get a reset. It's like, hey, man, there's some stuff we did previous year that I'm not super excited about. We made some mistakes, but you know what? January 1st, we get to start all over again. And I get to erase all the problems from before. And it just kind of gets your mindset going into, a more exciting place. And so for us, that's really big in terms of setting strategy. So what we're doing now with our clients is strategic planning for 2024. Most of the founders of NLPT, we typically do it in January. It might seem a little bit weird, but we like to have all of our financials done. All the books are closed for 2023. And okay, now we plan for 2024. But before I learned all this stuff, I would just kind of, do the same thing over and over again. And I would see, I wouldn't see much in terms of like growth or progression, because if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, then, you're going to be disappointed for sure. But
I
when
think
we,
as practice owners and business owners, we get to that new year. It's like, yeah, we're gonna do awesome this year. We're gonna, grow our targets here, and we're gonna be busy. We're gonna be a much better year than last year. But there really isn't a lot of planning that goes into it, right? In order
yeah,
to achieve that. And it's something
yeah,
that I've definitely seen a lot. I've done it myself, right?
yeah,
Got a
sure.
little better at it.
Yeah, we've all done it. It's at some point. And then once we put some strategy together, it's like, wow, this is like way better. So strategic planning is something that, again, the most private practice owners don't do, because they're just kind of stuck in the whirlwind. They're treating full time and they're trying to handle all these things. So it's exactly like you said, like what do we focus on in 2024? And what I like to think of is like a definition for strategy is a plan of action designed to achieve an overall aim. Okay, that's pretty broad, right? That can be, how many new patients do we want to see in 2024? How many visits do we want to see? How much profit do we want to see? There's so many different things that a practice owner has to look at. So for me, I have ADD. I cannot focus on a task for very long because there's so many different things I have to work on in my practice. So think about it. Like at the end of the year, I'll typically do like a brain dump. I'll dump it by organizational board. So if you don't have an org board, that's just kind of how your organization is structured. And so you've got probably you as the CEO at the top. You've probably got clinical directors and some PTs, depending on the size of your practice, but you're kind of running the ship for the most part. So you're worried about patient care, marketing, recruiting and hiring, billing, collections, authorizations, insurance verifications, onboarding and training. Like, oh yeah, we should really go back and clean that up a little bit, but I'm so busy. We got to hire somebody. We just kind of do the best we can and, get them treating patients. IT and software. God, I hate that part. I'm just not a tech guy, but some people love that, but I hate it. Like HIPAA compliance, continuing education, paid time off. Like, okay, how do we structure that? And people are going to want vacations when they come here, right? Student education, team building, executive planning. So there's a ton of stuff that you have to do. And what happens to me, I just get so overwhelmed. I just go back to bed and pull the sheets over my head again, because it's just so suffocating to do that. So
Or as a practice owner, you like to go focus what you're good at, which is patient care, right?
right.
So
Yeah.
so you put all your attention on that, and just hope the other things work out. I always equate it to, like if you ever gone to like a circus or a juggling show, the plate spinning on the stick. Have you ever seen someone
Yeah.
that? And you have like all these plates lined up and spinning on sticks, and then you're over here and you might be working on oh, we need new patients, so you start spinning up the marketing plate, and then over here, some staff issues start to happen, so your staffing your staffing dish starts to wobble. You got to go over there and start to spin that up again. So that's one of the analogies I learned a long time ago, was like that kind of plate spinning. So you have to be able to keep your attention on all those different plates, keep them going at the speed for growth. And if you don't, then they will start to wobble and falter at some point.
Right. So what's the one thing, if you only had one of those plates, Neil, which is the one that you got to make sure that you don't stop spinning? And that's kind of what I want to talk to your audience about today. And just in working with other private practice owners, I've found this to be true, that if you could only work on one thing in your practice, and that one thing would make everything else easier or completely unnecessary to focus on, what would that one plate be? So I tend to gravitate towards units per visit and revenue per visit, just because I've seen it with so many clients. And this is not the first thing. If I asked a private practice owner, we gave them that previous list of all the things that I said, they would probably pick, marketing. Well, if we don't get if we don't get new patients in, this place is going to fall apart. And it's got, yeah, that marketing is definitely important. You can't ignore any of those things, or you will ignore it to your detriment. But what is to try to focus in on one thing? The biggest impact you can have is really improving your units per visit and revenue per visit. And there's people that are listening to this right now. They're like, that doesn't make any sense. I've never looked at that, and I'm doing fine. So let's do an exercise right now. And there's a picture on the screen that you can't see if you're listening, but I'll walk you through it. This was a graph that was revenue per visit for one of our founders. Now, if you guys know Arlen Alburo, he runs a very successful practice and works in it a very minimal amount of time. He has all this stuff dialed in way better than me. So when he told me, hey, I had dinner with Chuck, and I improved my revenue per visit quite a bit by doing something, I was like, I couldn't understand how that's even possible, because he had everything figured out in his practice. And so you got a chart here, and then this pink little dot here. This is dinner with Chuck. So he had dinner with Chuck and his wife, and he said, "Hey, I found something interesting about our units per visit, revenue per visit, and here's what happened." So Arlen's revenue per visit went up about $4 in a very short period of time. And you're thinking, $4, how much does that matter? Here's what I want everybody to do right now. If you're driving, then don't do it. But when you get home, I want you to take what you think your average visits per week is going to be next year. So, Neil, we can do this. And just take the clients that you work with, and you might not know this off the top of your head, but what is like a typical practice seeing in terms of visits per week or per month for you guys?
Yeah, anywhere from like 150 to 200 per week.
Okay, perfect. So we'll take 200. So 200 visits a week times 52 weeks is about 1,000 visits, right? So you guys do this at home. The minimum we see when you start looking at this is $10 a visit. The max I've seen is 45. 45 is not a realistic number, so don't use that. But typically we'll see a $10 increase in revenue per visit. So at home, you take whatever your number is, if that's 100, 200, 500 a week, whatever that is, do that. So we took 200. So we're going to multiply that by 10, and that's $100,000. So what about you, Neil? I could use an extra $100,000.
Sure,
Okay.
sounds good to me.
So it's a significant amount of money. And would $100,000 maybe make some of the other things that you're worried about a little bit easier to handle? Now, money doesn't solve everything. But the problem that we see with practice owners is they're stuck in doing all that stuff. They can't free themselves up because they're treating full time. So if you give a private practice owner, hey, there's going to be an extra $100,000 without changing your visit numbers, like you don't have to increase your visit numbers or new patients, just trying to take that number. Could we replace you on the schedule, at least partially, so that we can free you up to work on all the other stuff that you want to do? So to give you an idea, in Arlen's number, it was $4 a visit. And now he has a large practice. So it was an extra $156,000 that he figured out like inside of a couple weeks and was able to get that number to where it was. So that's my mini sales pitch on, hey, it's time to start looking at units per visit and revenue per visit and things that you've been talking about in your podcast recently. As reimbursement rates go down and inflation goes up, like this is really important. If you ignore this, you're going to ignore it to your own detriment. So we've got to start focusing in on this. And we're going to use this system. So again, with all the practices that we worked with, it kind of comes down to creating a system to fix any metric they want in their practice. So if we're going to take units per visit, revenue per visit, we'll focus on that. But you can use this system for anything in your practice. And shouldn't be any new concepts, but when applying it to the world of physical therapy, it really helps. The 5 things you've got to do is you got to have clean data. So you got to know what your numbers are. And we'll go into this in detail. You got to set some benchmarks. You got to track results. You have to coach up underperformers. You have to build in accountability. So taking the first one here is clean data. So when we do consulting, or we have forms you can fill out on our website to do a practice analysis call with us, we ask you a bunch of questions. One of the questions we ask is, what's your units per visit? And very rarely do we get, what we're looking for is one number, decimal point, another number. But most practice owners don't know what this is. They'll typically say, it's somewhere between 3.5 and 4.5 units per visit. Well, that's not a real number. I can't work with that because I need to know the exact number that your practice is working with so we can build out a plan in order to see if there's improvement there. So we typically we'll get a range. A range is not a clean number. That's dirty data. So we start with units per visit for a lot of reasons, but one, it's extremely objective. There's not a lot of subjectivity in it. So it's really easy to find typically in your EMR, even if you have, outdated EMRs that the reporting is not great. Almost all the time, you're going to be able to find this number. And it tells a real story about your PT's understanding of coding. So again, in physical therapy school, I've been out for a while. I am starting to see a little bit more in terms of the students that are coming through, but you don't get understanding of coding and what to bill and all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot of complexity just to the whole system. So that isn't a huge area of opportunity where they're treating patients, but they're not necessarily billing correctly for the treatment that they're providing.
Yeah, I've seen everything you can imagine. I've seen practices that, we treat them for an hour and we do 3 units of therapeutic exercise and 1 manual therapy because that's about what it looks like. I've seen some that have tons of variation in neuromuscular education versus therapeutic activity. You have to have understanding of what that is. And that's too long to go into in this talk. But the most important part of that is if you're going to start and you're going to look at kind of some change in your organization in 2024, units per visit is a really great place to start because of those reasons. And understanding AMA 8-minute rule versus Medicare 8-minute rule, it doesn't take a ton. It takes a little bit of work on the front end to understand that, but you've got to get that dialed in, because not doing that correctly, not only is it costing you money because there's money left on the table, but it's not compliant with your insurance contracts. You can't just say, they were here for about 60 minutes and we billed about these units. That's not how it works. You have to account for every minute under care. So once you have some understanding there, then you guys had some benchmarks, and that's really a 3-step process. So it's finding out what the number is historically, so you can go back and find out what that data was. Okay. And then you find out where it should be or where you want it to be based on your current knowledge. Now, this becomes a little bit difficult because if you've never looked at this before, which is pretty common for practice owners, but it's like, well, I don't know where to set the number. I'll tell you, the practice owner probably has the most understanding of that. If they're still treating the practice, using their number as a benchmark, as long as they have understanding what that is probably a good place to start. But this is a process. You're going to have to go through and kind of learn how to do this and just take initial measurements, kind of like physical therapy, right? You take initial measurements, you do some treatment or intervention, and you remeasure and see where you're at. So that's going to be part of the process. And then you make sure all parties know what that number is. If you don't have a target for them to shoot at, then it's hard for them to be successful. If they don't know what the number is supposed to be, then it's going to be hard for them to do that.
Do you want more freedom in your clinic? Then you need to work on your business, not just in it. The top practice owners know that they need a marketing system that consistently attracts patients from the internet. And at Practice Promotions, we've helped hundreds of practice owners skyrocket to the top of Google and get more new patients from online. Go to practicepromotions.net/kit to get our free practice marketing sample kit. It includes all our digital marketing tips and tricks that will get you new patients from Google. That's practicepromotions.net/kit, KIT, for a free marketing kit. And now back to the show.
All parties know what that number is. If you don't have a target for them to shoot at, then it's hard for them to be successful. If they don't know what the number is supposed to be, then it's going to be hard for them to do that.
And I think too, like, especially for, again, starting a new year, looking at numbers, we gotta keep it real, right? And if you, like what you're saying there, like if you know that it's, hey, this is historically where you've been, right? And then you can match that to, okay, what is a reasonable percentage here that we could shoot for? It makes it much more doable, right? And then people can get behind that, versus if we just say put out a lofty goal out there, we might have quite a difficult time attaining that goal because we haven't really looked at the historical side of it.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of intimidating for people because, well, we've never done this before. And it's like, you got to start somewhere. So let's just start. Yeah, in the beginning, it's going to be ugly, just like anything else in physical therapy. If you've never done a specific manual technique, the first time you lay hands on somebody, it's not going to go great, but you've got to kind of, we say, push through the suck. Like, okay, just know you're going to suck at this in the beginning. But at some point, you won't suck at it, and then that will be the point that we're trying to get to. So step number 3 is to track results. So if you're not tracking any results, then it's hard to see progress. So there's 3, we have scoreboards. So if we're, let's say we're looking at units per visit. So we kind of get old-fashioned pen and paper, like you can do that, or have a whiteboard in the back. It's like, okay, here's my 3 clinicians in this office. Here's the numbers that we're looking at by week or by month, however you spread that out. And then we're just kind of putting those numbers up there and everybody gets to see it. Okay. So it's got to be publicly placed. And a lot of people have some concerns about this. So it's like, take any other metric like arrival rate. So arrival rate is pretty commonly measured in most practices. How many patients did we schedule? How many came in? We get an arrival rate there. So we separate those out by clinician, not to make people feel bad, but to highlight where people need some help. So if you have someone in units per visit, it's typically time-based, right? So if you have a ton of variation in that, if I'm an insurance company and I come in and do an audit, I need to know what's happening. The only thing the insurance company sees for the most part is what you coded on that visit. So if you see someone that is at 5 units per visit and someone's at 3 units per visit, and they're working on the same floor and they're doing about the same amount of treatment, I mean, unless the 5 unit per visit PT is seeing patients for an hour and the 3 unit per visit PT is seeing patients for a half hour, then there's no other explanation for it's getting coded wrong. And I'm here to tell you right now, undercoding for what you do is the same amount of insurance fraud as overcoding for what you do. That takes a little bit of adjustment for people to understand, but you can't go one way or the other. So if you have the same amount of time on the floor, you've got to have some consistency there. So we put that up on a whiteboard, and it's like, okay, we got to find out where people are. And then we use it digitally, like you send it out through email. You've got to have some kind of scoreboard. Like the scoreboard has to be up somewhere. People have to see it, and people have to be comfortable with this. And I know that makes people a little bit squeamish, but guys, you're hiring PTs. How did you get into PT school? You had to have really good grades, really objective measures for how they were doing. The people that had lower grades did not get into PT school. So you had to get good grades to stay in PT school. If your GPA dipped below a certain amount, you want an academic probation, and they're like, hey man, you got to get your stuff together, or else you're not going to be in the program. You're not going to be a PT. So I think people are more comfortable with this than owners initially think they are. So I don't want owners to get intimidated by, we're going to put some scores up like that. That's how this works, and they're used to it.
So Travis, for that one, can you help us kind of restate there those key metrics that you'd really like people to see on that scoreboard?
Yeah. So for like all the metrics are just units per visit, revenue per visit.
Yeah. What's the let's say like the top 3 ones that you would suggest people are really putting up there right now?
Yeah. So we split it up into kind of case management and then coding and collection. So there's kind of 2 different levels of that. And actually, I'll give you a resource, and your listeners can download that. And there's about 14 or 15 metrics that we really look at. But to answer your question, units per visit and revenue per visit, and kind of like
so even like splitting it up there a little bit, when you're saying like case management, so that would be like arrival rate, number of visits that they're seeing,
length of stay.
Yeah, and then there's the financial side, right? So how many units are we coding for? What's their averages on that? Yeah, that makes sense, right?
Yeah. So starting out, if you're not tracking any of these metrics in your practice, then we'll say kind of look at units per visit, revenue per visit to start. But yeah, then you can apply this to any other metric, and there'll be a PDF download that you can have that your listeners.
I think that is an area that a lot of practice owners do, not intentionally, but don't really have attention on pushing with their staff, right? Is the financial component that they were actually responsible for. And I always remember sitting down with my therapist, and I had it broken out like, hey, this is what it actually cost us to deliver care per visit. And it was mind blowing to them when like the actual cost it took to see a patient. And then it really helped them be much more open to that. I have a financial responsibility here to the practice, right? And so I do need to understand how to bill properly and be measured on that part of it too. We're always here to help patient get obviously the best outcome, the best recovery that they can possibly have, but we need to get paid properly for it so that we can level up our therapists, right, and our staff. They want raises. We got to keep pushing for financial improvements that way too, to help them get where they want to get financially.
Yeah, I think therapists want more feedback than you think. They want to know where they stand. They want to know how well they're doing. You have to decide what those metrics are. For us, the number one case management metric for us is successful graduation. So what percentage of your patients are you getting from initial evaluation all the way to a successful outcome? And measuring that and making sure that every therapist knows what their individual number is really important for us. And they want that. They want to know, hey, if my successful graduation is lower than Jen, like what is Jen doing that I'm not doing? And typically they'll kind of ask, and they'll shadow and be like, what the heck is going on? Sometimes that therapist doesn't exactly know. They're just amazing and they just roll out of bed being awesome. But a lot of times there's metrics that you can link to that main metric improving. So yeah, open book management for us is really big. And I think a lot of practice owners are nervous about the financial end. Like our P&Ls are open. You can go into our Google Drive. Anybody that works with us, our aides, our PTs, our clinical directors, anybody can look at that. And initially I was a little nervous about that. But what happens is kind of what you were talking about, Neil, where it's like, if you don't have open book management, I'm telling you right now, your staff thinks that you're buying like 3 boats every weekend. You got like 7 vacation houses.
Right.
And you're like, guys, it costs us $85 to execute a visit. Like that's how much it costs. We make $95 a visit. It's like, wait a second, you're only making $10 every time a patient comes in? I'm like, yep, that's what's happening. So it's you'll get more people understanding and pitching in, be like, hey man, I love this place. I want to work here. I don't work with many practice owners where it's like, man, I just cannot they just keep leaving and going. There's way better jobs at the hospital, like pay wise, maybe, but in terms of like jobs that they love, people that work in private practice love their job. So if they can see is like, wow, if we're not financially stable, then they might ask me to leave on Monday because they don't have the money to make payroll. So I'm so invested in this. And yeah, the units per visit and revenue per visit, it's just kind of a natural thing for most practice owners to kind of look at it. But having your staff understand, you've got to have your staff understand that, because just you understand that is not going to work. So at some point, you're going to get somebody that is an underperformer. Doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means if units per visit, everybody's at 4.5 and someone's at 3.5, they don't have an understanding of what's going on. Okay. So when you have that, then we do meetings with them and we'll say, okay, there's 3 main coaching questions that we use. So what's on your mind? They see, right? They're looking at the scoreboard. They see they're at the bottom. No one wants to be at the bottom of the scoreboard. So they have awareness around that. So it's like, okay, what's on your mind? Typically it's like, I don't know what's going on. Like, how are my units at 3.5 and everybody else is at 4.5? Okay. So let's dig into that and try to find out, are you using modalities with your patients? Is there some weird payer mix thing where you're seeing some payer mix that's a 3-unit max? And that's typically not the answer. Or are you just not accounting for every minute under care? So what we'll typically do is we'll have someone that will code right next to them. So when I originally did this before my clinical directors did it, if someone was underperforming, I would go into the visit. I'd say, here's an initial evaluation, and you're going to do the initial evaluation. I'm not going to say anything, but I'm going to code the visit, and you're going to code the visit. And then after that, we're going to put our papers together and see what happened. And typically, it's just not it's a poor understanding of how to code for a visit, how to account for all 62 minutes of time that you spent with that patient. Once they understand that, it's like, oh, yeah, that's pretty straightforward. I just wasn't doing it correctly. Now I'll change my practices. It's really not that hard. And then say, okay, how can I help? Do you want me to do more coaching sessions with you? Do you want me to watch you do an initial evaluation versus a daily visit? Do you want me to look at how your Medicare coding looks compared to your Blue Cross Blue Shield? Because that's going to be a different rule. Like, what is going on there? And we don't have PTs that fail at this. It's just kind of putting together a system and just a way to kind of introduce, hey, this is not going the way that it should. No big deal. We just have to kind of show you how it's going.
And you definitely want to, people want that feedback too, like, because they want to be very good at what they do. And if you don't have people that don't want to be good at what they do, they're probably not the right fit to be on your team in the first place. But if you can give them that kind of feedback early on, most people are coachable, right? Most people want to get better at their job. And so if you have those conversations early, even though sometimes they can be a little uncomfortable, you're going to get a much better outcome, and the person's going to stay with you, right? Because we all know that hiring is very costly and turnover is very costly. But if you don't have those feedback conversations with those underperformers, eventually they will leave, right? And then you have to deal with it. And a lot of times it's unexpectedly, or it gets progressively worse, where it costs you more and more and more money because they underperform more and more. And then eventually they exit and you have to go through all that headache. But I like what you have there, where you really have to, just sit down with them, and you've got those metrics and those accountability, moments where you can walk them through, and it's coming from a place of help. Like, you want to help them do better, right? You want to help them be successful in their role.
Yeah. No one wants to be at the bottom of the scoreboard. So just kind of helping them out and pushing them up. And then when they get a win there, man, they're just on fire. It's awesome.
Definitely.
Yeah. So the 5th step is just building in accountability. So this is with one-on-ones with us. So every person in our organization has a one-on-one at a minimum of once a month with their direct support, we call them. So again, that goes back to the org board. It's like, all right, who's in charge of stuff? Like, if an aide is struggling with something in my clinic, they're not coming to me. Like, sometimes that will happen. I'll say, well, let's go back and look at the org board. Who is the person that's directly supporting you? And then kind of go to them and figure that out. But if you're not doing one-on-ones in your practice, I do tend to get a lot of pushback in terms of, man, we got to block out time. That's time when we could have seen patients. I don't think that's a great use of my time. One-on-ones with your direct reports is one of the most effective ways to get performance out of your team. You have to do it. And then once you start doing it, you're like, wow, I can't believe we functioned without doing this. But it's typically like a 30-minute meeting where we'll have a set structure and go over the metrics that we're working on. So if it's units per visit or revenue per visit, we're doing that every 30 days. So we'll review that every 30 days and kind of see where you are, and then make a plan for if it's where we want it to be. Great, you got that dialed in. Now we can pick something else. Let's take a look at your arrival rate. Let's take a look at your successful graduation rate, whatever that is. But doing that with your team that's how you build in accountability. I'm sure you can point to many examples of this, Niels, but you've gone into your business we'll take private practice and say, okay, we need to work on our arrival rate. Okay, it was at 84%. Our goal is 90%. We work on it for 10, 12, 13 weeks, whatever. Oh, we get up to 90%. Great. Everybody did a great job. What can we fix next? Okay, now we'll turn and we'll look at successful graduation rate. And then we'll work on that for 13 weeks. But then we'll look back and we'll say, whoa, what happened to our arrival rate? It went back down to 84% because we weren't focused on it at the time. So how you fix that is you just have regular one-on-one meetings, and you can then keep an eye on that metric, and you can pick as many metrics as you want to keep an eye on. But for us, what we like to do, if we're working on something, we want to see that for a full year. We're really focused on it for a 13-week period and try to improve that. And then we just kind of put that, autopilot's a bad term, but it is kind of like you just kind of keep an eye on it periodically. And that's how you build in accountability. If you've ever had an issue with fixing a problem in your practice and then leaving it and then seeing that it drops again, it's because you didn't have some kind of system for accountability. And so that is, I mean, you can apply that 5-step system. As I'm saying this, and as you listen to this, there's probably nothing new that people are not, yeah, I know I've got to do that, but kind of putting it into a little bit more structure is what really helps with that. So if you want to take a deeper dive on that, I wrote a book about this. So it's this 5-step process. And we actually did a live event in the spring where we did a whole day. It was like an hour on each of those 5 steps. And the videos from that, from those trainings are actually in the book as well. So if you go to hiddenmillionsmachine.com, that's where you can get the version of that book. And it will go through. It's a lot different than like a typical book. I don't know. I'm sure you read tons of books, Neil. Have you ever read a book and it's like, yeah, that's good, but I don't know. I'm not applying really what I want to apply with this. I wrote this book with a different mindset. So it's really like a workbook. So when we look at it, there's the main section of it, which we'll go through here. Again, if you're listening on audio, it's not going to be as effective. But for the main section here, we go through all of those 5 steps that we just went through. So it's here. So it's clean data management. So this, in theory, it's a really easy read. I didn't write a 400-page book. It's basically the concept we have here. And then it's a lot of video trainings. So video trainings here. And then at the end of each chapter, there's a success check-in exercise. So it's a quiz that you take to find out how well you're doing in this area. So you don't have to do all the stuff in the chapter, just kind of find a base point. So that's kind of how we set benchmarks, right? So based on your score on this quiz, it tells you what to do next. So if you're not doing so great, start here. If you're kind of in the middle, there's a couple of things you have to dial in. Great. And if you score above a 45 on any of these quizzes, then you're doing great. Move on to something else. So there's video trainings in here, check-in exercises. And then at the end of all the chapters, actually, in order for you to have mastered this, you have to check all these boxes. So I want people writing this book. So you go in, if you have all this stuff dialed in, then you check it off, and that's how you move on to the next thing. Because I always kind of feel a little bit empty after reading a book. I'm like, it's a really great concept, but how do I apply it? So that's the book that I wanted to write to try to help out private practice owners.
That's awesome, Travis. And so what's the URL for that again for our listeners?
Yeah, hiddenmillionsmachine.com. So if you go there, yep, you can get that. And then you'll get access to an online library. That's where all the videos are. So, I mean, just in the live event alone, there's 5 hours of videos of us explaining each of those 5 steps and have a ton of detail, PDF downloads, tons of stuff to make it really like kind of a workbook that you can go through and apply this stuff, because that's where we kind of felt a little bit empty as consultants. Like, hey, we have this great information, we tell it to you, and you have to go apply it. And then we'll go back in coaching calls and be like, hey, did you apply that? I'm like, not quite yet. Okay. So we just need like a checkoff system. As I said, I have a lot of ADD. So I have to, in the morning, I write all the stuff down. I got to do that. I have to check that box off. And if I check the box off, I know I've mastered it. That was the goal with this book.
Awesome. So Hidden Millions
Machine.com.
Hiddenmillionsmachine.com. Go check that out. And then also check out Travis on physicaltherapybilling.com.
Yeah.
Very awesome company there, group. Can really help you dig into the financial and the billing side of it, where a lot of money does go missing. And it's all that hard work that you and your team has put into treating patients. You definitely want to make sure that the insurance company is paying you the way that they should, and things are not falling through the cracks and losing that money out. So they do a very good job of building in great systems and automation that helps you recover a lot more of the money that you should be paid for. So thanks, Travis, for bringing your insight here today. It's going to help our listeners get off to a really good start here in the new year. And again, go check out Travis's book there to get information on that and connect with him. And so here's from me to you, wishing you much success, especially here in the new year.
Thank you for listening to the Practice Marketing Podcast. Don't forget to get your free practice marketing sample kit at practicepromotions.net/kit. Start 2024 off the right way by building marketing systems that automatically attract new patients from online. That's practicepromotions.net/kit.